Mm. The Senate will now be in session. All rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic.
The 66th session of the Senate and the first regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. We'll be led in prayer today by our distinguished colleague from the great province of Cavite, Senator Bong Revilla.
Panginoon Diyos Ama, kasabay ng aming pananampalataya sa iyo, ang aming pasasalamat sa walang hanggang pagpapalang kaloob mo sa amin sa araw-araw. Tanda ng iyong lubos na pagmamahal. We glorify your name for being our constant stronghold on which we depend on. Panginoon, kayo po ang umpisa at ang dulo. Sa inyo nagmula ang lahat ng biyayang tinatamasa namin. At kayo rin po ang lunas sa lahat ng mga pagsubok sa buhay. Naninikluhod po kami sa inyo upang muli ay pakinggan ninyo ang inyong bayan. Sa gitna ng naglalagablab na init na dulot ng krisis sa klima at hagupit ng El Nino, kami ay nagsusumamo sa inyong pagsagip sa amin mula sa nakaambang pagdurusang dulot nito. Muli rin po kaming kumakatok sa inyong sagradong puso at humihiling na kami ay balutin ng iyong banal na dugo upang masalag kami mula sa patuloy na panganib na dulot ng COVID-19. Lalo sa panahong ito na dumarami na naman ang nagkakasakit. Palitan niyo po ang aming pangamba ng pananampalatayang walang hagupit ng pagsubok na hindi niyo kayang puksain. Buong pagpapakumbaba po naming hinihiling na palitan ninyo ang puyos ng tagtuyot at peligro sa kalusugan ng init at higpit niyong yakap. Lord, please hear our prayers, strengthen our spirit, and nourish our resilience so that our nation will be reminded that there is no adversity that your power cannot overcome. Kumakapit po kami sa inyo at isinusuko ang lahat ng aming pag-aalinlangan at takot, gayon din ang aming mga dalangin at pangarap. Lahat pong ito ay tinataas namin sa inyo sa ngalan ng inyong banal na kalooban. Amen.
Amen. We have today, ladies and gentlemen, the University of Makati Chorale to lead us in the singing of the Philippine National Anthem, and after which they will render a song entitled Bahay ni Gary Ganat. Bahay Gary Ganat. Hindi bahay.
Bayang matino, kaya sa silangan, alaw ng puso, sa bibig mo'y buhay, lupang hinihang, tulad ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pagsisi, sa bibig, sa simoy, sa langit mong maghaw, ay ang isang paglalabay na mahal, ang isang ng matawat ngunit ang may nalagdig. Ikaw ay nagtarang na kailan pa may magdilig. Yung palang araw na aking pagsinta ay langit sabi mo. Ang ibigay ng ay malapit ay nagdahil sa'yo. Sa mga pinagala, sa mga tambakan, kami matalakang nagsisika ng titig sa munting barong-barong na sira-sira. Habang noon sa isang mansyon, halos wala sa lilang ng kahalapan, wala silang sa lilig ng pera. At mga sirang pinagtapi-taping masura, pinatungan ng hindi ko maintindihan kung bakit sa ganito ay ba hindi at isinarawan sinumpuni ko sa mga taong manalig naman isang bantog na senador nilapitan ko at galumpasan ng malaking kolehiyo ang pinabala sa mundo ang daliwat ang pulpito lahat sila'y nagkasundo na ang tawag sa ganito ay bahay
Thank you very much to the University of Makati Chorale, mga kababayan ni Senator Nancy Binay.
Ang
Birthday. Ang may birthday.
magbe-birthday. Mr. President, yeah, the University of Makati Chorale is led by its conductor, Miss Maria Carmina Ramos.
Yes, so we can proceed with the roll call. Secretary, please call the roll of members.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
With 20 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you so much. Mr. President, before we proceed with the reference of business, may I be allowed to just acknowledge some guests from the gallery, guests of our dear colleague, Senator Lauren Legarda, Pinamalayan Oriental Mindoro Mayor, Aristeo A. Baldos Jr., Vice Mayor Rodolfo Magsino, and the Sangguniang Bayan members of Pinamalayan Oriental Mindoro.
Welcome to the Senate from Oriental Mindoro. Diyan po tayo galing, Senator Majority Leader.
Even
We
the
were just there
senators
a weekend
Your
ago.
Honors. Mr. President, yes, I'd like to mention that, Mr. President, we were able to go to Nauhan and Mansalay, and the people of Oriental Mindoro are very happy for the support being given, not only by the Senate President and this representation, but also members of this August chamber.
Yes.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
There being no objection, Secretary, please proceed with the reference of business. Sana ba yan?
Bills on first reading, Senate number 2036, promoting positive parenting in all settings and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Ontiveros.
Heard to Committees on Women, Children, Family Relations, Social Justice, and Finance.
2037, transferring the control and supervision of the provincial and sub-provincial jails to the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, amending RA 6975 as amended and for other purposes. Senator Zubiri.
Heard to Committees on Public Order and Local Government.
2038, providing for the modernization of the FIWOCs, providing funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Zubiri.
The Committees on Science and Technology, Ways and Means and Finance.
2039, prohibiting money mules and other fraudulent acts involving bank accounts, e-wallets, and other financial accounts, providing penalties and for other purposes. Senator Zubiri.
Thank you. To the Committees on Banks and Financial Institutions, Justice, Human Rights, and Finance.
2040, strengthening the national program for the elimination of tuberculosis, amending for the purpose RA 10767. Senator Ontiveros.
The Committees on Health and Demography, Higher Technical Vocational Education, Ways and Means and Finance.
2041, institutionalizing the Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting System, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Villanueva.
Committees on Economic Affairs, Environment, Natural Resources, and Finance.
2042, imposing the death penalty in the heinous crime of security personnel engaged to commit murder and providing penalties for any person who recruit, maintain, use, aid, fund, or train security personnel to commit murder and for other purposes. Senator Padilla.
Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Constitutional Amendments on Revision of Codes.
2043, creating the National Transitional Justice Reconciliation and Commission for the Bangsamoro, establishing a Transitional Justice and Reconciliation Program for the Bangsamoro, appropriating funds therefore. Senator Ontiveros.
Committees on Local Government and Finance.
2044, establishing the Public Schools of the Future in Technology and appropriating funds therefore. Senator Angara.
Committees on Basic Education, Sustainable Development Goals, and Finance.
2045, an act to reform the budget process by enforcing greater accountability in public financial management, promoting fiscal sustainability, strengthening Congress's power of the purse, instituting an integrated PFM system, increasing budget transparency and participation, and for other purposes. Senator Marcos.
Heard to Committee on Finance.
2046, revitalizing and strengthening the self-reliant defense posture program to address external and internal security threats and challenges to national development, including pandemics, and promoting the development of a national defense industry pursuant thereto, providing funds therefore. Senator Marcos.
Heard the Committees on National Defense, Ways and Means, and Finance.
2047, recognizing the civil effects of church decreed annulment. Senator Padilla.
Heard the Committees on Women and Children and Family Relations.
2048, amending Section 140A, C, and E of RA 7160 as amended, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991. Senator Padilla.
Heard the Committees on Local Government, Ways and Means.
2049, exempting micro-insurance policies from value-added tax, tax on life insurance premiums, and documentary stamp tax, amending for this purpose Sections 108, 109, 123, 183, 184, 185, 186, and 187 of the NIRC as amended. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
2050, crafting a national women's business enterprise policy and prescribing arrangements for developing, coordinating, and implementing a national program for women's enterprise. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Women, Family Relations, Trade and Commerce, and Finance.
2051, providing for the right of married women to retain their maiden surnames, amending for the purpose Article 370 of RA 386 as amended. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Women and Children and Family Relations.
2052, mandating employee and patient notification of environmental, health, and safety hazards in hospitals. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Health and Demography.
2053, extending the life of the Philippine Aerospace Development Corporation by another 50 years, amending for the purpose PD 286 as amended. Appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Government, Corporations, and Public Enterprises.
2054, repealing RA 8485 as amended by RA 10631 and creating for the purpose the Animal Welfare Bureau under the Department of Agriculture to institutionalize and strengthen the implementation of the animal welfare and govern its operation and enforcement. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Agriculture, Civil Service, Ways and Means, and Finance.
2055, granting free tertiary agricultural education and other related courses to all dependent children of qualified indigent farmers and for other purposes. Senator Padilla.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food, Higher Technical and Vocational Education, and Finance.
2056, promoting local arts and entertainment industry by providing local film industry corporate tax breaks and exempting venue operators from the payment of amusement tax when showing locally produced films and music events featuring Filipino artists. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Local Government, Ways and Means.
2057, declaring Barangay Kapatagan in the city of Digos, province of Davao del Sur, an ecotourism site and appropriating funds therefore. Senator Tulfo.
Committees on Tourism, Environment, Natural Resources, Climate Change, Finance.
2058, amending RA 11036 to incorporate psychological services for children and young adolescents during public health emergencies. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Health and Demography.
2059, providing for the Magna Carta of the out-of-school youth. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Youth and Finance.
2060, creating anti-drug abuse council in all provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays throughout the country and providing funds therefore. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Public Order, Dangerous Drugs, Local Government, and Finance.
2061, fixing the host city share of on the earnings of the PAGCOR, amending for the purpose Section 12 of PD 1869 as amended. Senator Tolentino.
To the Committees on Games and Amusements, Government Corporations, and Public Enterprises.
2062, expanding PhilHealth coverage to include benefit package to all mental health disorders and for other purposes. Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Health and Demography and Finance.
2063, establishing a sleep disorder awareness and education program. Senator Villar M.
To the Committee on Health and Demography.
2064, an act for the reallocation of a new spectrum for distance learning research and development and for other purposes, appropriating funds therefore. Senator Legarda.
To the Committee on Public Service, or Committees of Public Service, Science and Technology, and Finance.
2065, establishing at least one regional specialty center in DOH hospitals, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Health, Demography, and Finance.
2066, requiring critical information infrastructure institutions to adopt and implement adequate measures to protect their information and communications technology, systems, and infrastructure. Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committee on Science and Technology and Finance.
2067, institutionalizing the automatic income classification of provinces, cities, and municipalities, amending for the purpose Section 8 of RA 7160 as amended. Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Local Government and Finance.
2068, authorizing public-private partnerships and appropriating funds therefore. Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committees on Public Works, Economic Affairs, Ways and Means, and Finance.
Resolutions Resolution of both houses number 4, resolution of both houses of Congress proposing amendments to Section 18 of Article 7 of the 1987 Constitution, Senator Padilla.
To the Committees on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes.
Proposed Senate Resolution 558 congratulating and commending the Philippine National Pencaksilat team for bagging a total of 10 medals, 2 gold, 2 silver, and 6 bronze at the 2023 Sarawak Premier International Silat Championship held at the Stadium Perpaduan, Kuching, Sarawak, Malaysia. Senator Lapid.
To the Committee on Rules.
559, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an investigation on the boundary disputes among several LGUs in the provinces of Bukidnon and North Cotabato, with the end view of preserving the peace and order in the area and upholding the rule of law in settling these disputes. Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Local Government, Public Order, and Dangerous Drugs.
560, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on reports of unprofessionalism and inefficiency hounding the BI for its conduct of departure protocols and procedures for international bound passengers, with the end in view of streamlining, professionalizing, and modernizing the agency's processes and operations. Senator Ejercito.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights.
561, directing the appropriate committees of the Senate to conduct an inquiry on the measures, plans, and programs of the government to avoid possible water shortage in Metro Manila and other affected areas in the country. Senator Villanueva.
To the Committee on Environment and Natural Resources.
562, directing the Senate Committee on Health to conduct an inquiry on the condition of the facilities in the National Center for Mental Health to support patients' recovery, with the end in view of ensuring that patients receive proper care and holding those responsible accountable. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Health and Demography.
563, resolution congratulating the Philippine team for the exceptional performance in the 6th International Mathematics Open for Young Achievers held in Singapore. Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Rules.
564, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the alleged involvement of high-ranking officials and officers of the PNP on the 6.7 billion Manila drug bust, with the end in view of laying down a system that would not only prevent circumvention of rules in order to evade liability, but would likewise ensure full accountability of the personnel involved. Senator Revilla Jr.
To the Committee on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations, Blue Ribbon Committee.
565, urging the President to declare state of national calamity due to the severe impact of African swine fever on the swine industry. Senator Tolentino.
To the Committee on Rules.
566, directing the Committee on Ways and Means to conduct an inquiry on the rising incidence of illicit trade on excisable products, with the end in view of abating the proliferation of illicit trade by introducing remedial legislation as may be necessary. Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committee on Ways and Means.
567, directing the Committee on Ways and Means to conduct an inquiry on the apparent inconsistency between the provision of the CREATE law granting incentives to registered business enterprises vis-a-vis its implementing rules and regulations and other issuances issued in relation thereto. Senator Gatchalian.
Committee on Ways and Means.
568, urging the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry into the implementation of the rainwater collector and springs development. Senator Legarda.
Committee on Public Works.
569, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the alarming results of the 2021 Financial Inclusion Survey conducted by the BSP. Senator Gatchalian.
Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies. There's an additional reference to business. Please proceed, Secretary.
Additional reference to business message of the President of the Philippines. Letter of His Excellency President Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos Jr. dated 14 March 2023, certifying to the necessity of the immediate enactment of Senate Number 1869, creating the Philippine Center for Disease Prevention and Control, defining its powers and functions, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, in order to address the need for a sufficiently funded and equipped epidemiology and surveillance body. The bill also aims to provide effective measures to control and prevent diseases, which include engaging in global and local health surveillance of current and emerging, re-emerging infectious diseases.
To the Committee on Rules.
Bills on first reading, Senate Number 2069, renaming the Agham Road and the BIR Road stretching from North Avenue, traversing to Quezon Avenue, up to East Avenue, all located in Quezon City, as Senator Miriam P. Defensor Santiago Avenue. Senator Tolentino.
To the Committee on Rules.
2070, creating a mandatory position for a Human Resource Management Officer in LGUs, amending for the purpose sections 443, 454, and 463 of RA 7160 as amended for other purposes. Senator Estrada.
To the Committees on Local Government, Civil Service, and Finance.
2071, modernizing the national measurement system of the Philippines, appropriating funds and for other purposes. Senator Estrada.
Committees on Science and Technology, Ways and Means, and Finance.
2072, institutionalizing the lifelong learning development framework, creating a lifelong learning development council, appropriating funds therefore. Senator Estrada.
Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education, Basic Education, and Finance.
2073, establishing and adopt a wildlife species program and providing incentives therefore, Senator Estrada.
To Committees on Environment, Natural Resources, Ways and Means, and Finance.
2074, amending RA 7925 by requiring public telecommunications entities and internet service providers to institute a refund mechanism for service outages and disruptions, Senator Estrada.
To Committee on Public Services.
2075, digitizing all books necessary for public education and establishing the Philippine Online Library, providing funds and for other purposes, Senator Estrada.
Committees on Basic Education, Science and Technology, and Finance.
2076, requiring the teaching of basic road safety and comprehensive driver's education as part of the curriculum of senior high schools and for other purposes, Senator Tulfo.
To Committees on Basic Education, Public Services, Ways and Means, and Finance.
2077, providing for the establishment of the Balikbayan Hub, an OFW resting lounge in all international airports which cater flights to and out of the Philippines, appropriating funds therefore, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Migrant Workers and Finance.
2078, enhancing the financial literacy of overseas Filipino workers and for other purposes, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committee on Migrant Workers.
2079, mandating private higher education institutions to waive the college entrance examination fees to underprivileged graduating high school students and high school graduates belonging to the top 15% of the graduating class, Senator Tulfo.
Committee on Higher Technical Education, Basic Education.
2080, identifying tourism development areas in Isabela, mandating support for tourism development, thereby creating the Isabela Tourism Council, appropriating funds therefore, Senator Tulfo.
To the Committees on Tourism, Environment, Natural Resources, and Finance.
2081, institutionalizing transparency in the Philippine downstream oil industry and amending for the purpose RA 8479, Senator Gatchalian.
To the Committee on Energy and Ways and Means.
2082, upgrading the salary grade of dentists employed in the public sector, providing funds therefore for other purposes, Senator Escudero.
To the Committee on Civil Service, Government Reorganization, Health, and Finance.
Resolutions, proposed Senate Resolution 570, calling for an inquiry in aid of legislation into the proposed merger of the Development Bank of the Philippines with the Land Bank of the Philippines, Senator Ontiveros.
To the Committees on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
571, directing the Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development and other appropriate committees of the Senate to conduct an inquiry on the compliance of Philippine registered vessels with the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Act, Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Labor, Employment, Human Resource Development, and Public Services.
572, honoring the memory of former Secretary Albert Del Rosario Sr. and his work that gave the Philippines its landmark victory against China in the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, Senator Ontiveros.
To the Committee on Rules.
573, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry into the reported breach of the database of the PNP and other government agencies, restore personal data of both employees and the general public with the end in view of auditing the extent and impact of the breach, enacting policies to strengthen cybersecurity, Senator Revilla Jr.
Committees on Science and Technology.
574, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry into the unprecedented massive personal data breach of the databases of the NBI, PNP, and other agencies which leak more than 1 million personal and sensitive records of law enforcers and private citizens in violation of data privacy, cybercrime, and other laws, Senator Tolentino.
To the Committee on Science and Technology.
575, directing the Committee on Tourism to conduct an inquiry on airline passengers' complaints against Cebu Pacific for overbooking, offloading, and booking glitches, with the purpose of calling on the EOT and the Civil Aeronautics Board to address these concerns and consider measures on how affected customers should be compensated. Senator Binay.
To the Committees on Tourism and Public Services. Sorry to hear.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move to consider on third reading, Senate Bill number 1615. Printed copies of the bill were electronically distributed to the members on March 27, 2023, in compliance with the 3-day rule in the Constitution.
This is the bill, Senate Bill number 1615, the bill of Honorable Angara.
The great Sani Angara,
Sani
Mr.
Angara.
President.
Yes, there being no objection to the motion is approved. Please proceed, Secretary.
An act recognizing the municipality of Baler in the province of Aurora as the birthplace of Philippine surfing.
Roll call vote. Please proceed.
Roll call vote. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
Yes. With 21 affirmative votes, no negative votes or abstentions, Senate Bill number 1615 is hereby approved on third reading. Congratulations to the author and sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Congratulations to our dear colleague, Senator Sani Angara. Mr. President, I move that we suspend the session for
Few
one
minutes.
Senate minute, Mr. President.
Yes, there being no objection, the session is suspended for 1 Senate minute. Chung.
Yes, Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 65th session, Wednesday, March 22, 2023, and consider the same as approved. I so move, Mr.
There
President.
be no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Francis Tolentino.
Our distinguished colleague from the great province of Cavite, Senator Francis Tolentino, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, earlier on, Mr. President, a resolution, PS resolution specifically, PS resolution number 564, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the alleged involvement of high-ranking officials and officers of the Philippine National Police on the 6.7 million Manila drug bust, with the end in view of laying down a system that would not only prevent the circumvention of rules in order to evade liability, but would ensure full accountability of the personnel involved. Said resolution, Mr. President, was referred to the Blue Ribbon Committee. Mr. President, I read Rule 10, Section 13, subsection 27 of our rules, and the interpretation of this representation is that the proper committee should be the Committee on Public Order, Mr. President. I move for the re-referral of the same to the Committee on Public Order, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, while I have some reservations, I will no longer object, as we have talked about this, Mr. President, during the caucus. And so we join the motion of our dear colleague, the gentleman from Cavite, Senator Francis Tolentino. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I move for a minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1480 under Committee Report number 11. This is the bill on rationalizing the disability pension of veterans. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measures that we close the period of interpellations and debate. I now move to open the period of amendments. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
With no committee amendments, considering that this is a substitute bill, I move that we open the period of individual amendments. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor of the measure, the chairperson himself, Senator Jinggoy Estrada, for individual amendments.
Our distinguished colleague, Chairperson of the Committee on National Defense, Senator Estrada, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we propose the following amendments. Section 1 of Senate Bill number 1480, which further amends Section 5, subsection H of Republic Act 6948 as amended. On page 3, line 5, delete the phrase "without a service connected." I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, the amendments approved.
On the same page, line 6, delete the word disability. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion and amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the same page, line 6, after the number 70, insert the phrase and not receiving disability pension under this act, comma. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, most amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finally, still on the same page, line 7, delete the word totally. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thus, the new provision from lines 4 to 9 shall now read as follows. provided, comma, that a veteran, comma, upon reaching the age of 70 and not receiving disability pension under this act, comma, is deemed disabled and shall be entitled to a monthly pension of 1,700 pesos only. The rationale of this, Mr. President, this is in line with the intervention of our good minority floor leader, Senator Coco Pimentel, during the period of interpellation, which further clarifies and simplifies the provision about the monthly disability pension entitlement of veterans who reached the age of 70. On another amendment, Mr. President, on page 3, lines 16 to 17. Section 2 on appropriations. Delete the phrase current year's available appropriations of the Philippine Veterans Office. And in lieu thereof, insert the phrase pension and gratuity fund. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion or the amendment, amendment's approved.
Thus, Section 2 will now read as follows. Section 2, appropriations. The initial amount necessary for the implementation of this act shall be charged against the pension and gratuity fund, period. Thereafter, comma, such sums as may be needed for the continued implementation of this act shall be included in the annual Generation Appropriations Act, period. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Chair, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Estrada.
Thank you, Mr. President. With no other individual amendments, I move to close the period of individual amendments. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion of the majority floor leader, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that we approve on second reading Senate Bill number 1480, subject to style. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, the Senate Bill number 1480 is hereby approved on second reading. Congratulations to the sponsor and authors.
Thank you, Mr. President. We congratulate our distinguished colleague, Senator Jinggoy Estrada. Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1480. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1806. This is the bill pertaining to the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights and Obligations Act. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of individual amendments. On that note, Mr. President, I move that we resume the period of individual amendments using the amended copy of the bill dated March 15, 2023 as our working draft. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, motion is approved. I see Senator Tolentino raising his hand.
Mr. President, at this juncture, may we recognize first the sponsor of the measure, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, for the individual amendments.
There being no objection, we'd like to the chair would like to recognize Senator Sherwin Gatchalian.
Okay. Yeah, sige. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. With the indulgence of the body, Mr. President, I have a few, not a few, but several amendments to the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. On page 1, section 2, line 8, delete the comma after the word responsibly and the succeeding phrase with due regard for taxpayers' right.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment's approved.
On section 4, on Taxpayers' Bill of Rights and Obligation, letter A on page 2, line 25, replace the word notwithstanding with the phrase without prejudice to. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment's approved.
On the same page 2, line 26, insert the word other between the words the and rights. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 2, after the words in all courts, delete period, replace it with a colon, then add the proviso provided further, comma, that nothing in this act shall amend, modify, or repeal the provisions of the above mentioned laws. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 3, delete the word accordingly and replace it with the words provided, finally that. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment's approved.
And the rationale for that amendment, Mr. President, and let me just put this on record. This amendment is being made to clarify that the enactment of this measure shall not result to the repeal or modification of existing laws. For example, Section 5, Paragraph G, on the right against baseless assessment shall not be read to mean that the power of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue to issue assessment based on best evidence obtainable as provided for under Section 6, Paragraph B of the Tax Code as amended is canceled or diminished. In addition, Section 5, Paragraph I on the right to avail of installment payments shall not be construed as granting the right to pay in installment any type of taxes since the Custom Modernization and Tariffs Act do not currently provide for installment payments. Next amendment, Mr. President, on Section 5 on taxpayers' basic rights, Paragraph A, on right to information. On page 3, line 9, delete the words information and replace it with the words be informed.
There being no objection to the amendment's approved.
This is an amendment from our good minority leader, Senator Pimentel. On page 3, line 12, delete the word "and" between the words regulation and procedures. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 12, insert the proviso and other issuances between the words procedure and as. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 16, insert a comma after the word findings and delete the word or between the words findings and allege. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 16, insert the phrase or any decisions or rulings rendered by the revenue authorities between the word violations and article the. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 16 to 17, delete the phrase have the right to between the words shall and be. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 17, insert the phrase informed in the written decision or ruling between the words be and clearly. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment's approved.
On page 13, line 17, delete the phrase informed. In page 3, line 17, delete the phrase informed in writing between the words sufficiently and of. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 19 to 20, delete the comma after the word based and the succeeding proviso. At the same time, such findings or violations are communicated. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 22, delete the phrase unless prejudicial to the government and change to uppercase the first letter of the article the. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment's approved.
On page 3, line 25, after the third paragraph, insert a new proviso that reads, the service of notices and decisions to the taxpayers shall be made in accordance with laws, rules, and regulations. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendment's approved.
On section 5 on taxpayers' basic rights, paragraph B, on right to fair and faithful application of laws. On page 3, line 26, insert a comma after the word fair and insert the word uniform between the words fair and the article end. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendment is approved.
On page 3, line 27, insert a comma after the word fair and insert the word uniform between the words fair and the article end. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
These amendments are from our good minority leader. Once more, Mr. President. On page 3, line 29, after section 5B, insert a new section 5C that reads C, right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax. Dash, the taxpayer shall have the right to pay only the amount of tax legally due, including interest and penalties. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On the new section 5, paragraph D, on right to challenge the position of and be heard by revenue authorities. On page 4, line 1, after the word authorities, replace the comma with a period and delete the preceding words unless otherwise prohibited by law. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 4, line 3, insert a new proviso that reads, the taxpayer shall have the right to be heard and that the evidence presented by the taxpayer before the revenue authorities be duly considered by the revenue authorities in deciding any matter involving the taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 4, line 4, insert a new paragraph E. The new section 5, paragraph E shall read as follows. Letter E, right to a fair and impartial proceedings before the revenue authorities, dash. The taxpayer shall at all times be entitled to a fair and impartial dispositions of the assessment cases, deficiencies, findings, requests for rulings, decisions, and other dispositions made by the revenue authorities concerning the taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Mr. President,
Senator Tolentino is recognized.
yes, on the same page, Mr. President, I have an amendment, page 4, line 14, after the word proceedings, and in lieu thereof, insert a semicolon and the phrase provided that, comma, any communication, comma, correspondence, and bracket, or document submitted or exchanged between the taxpayer and the qualified professional that they engaged shall be considered strictly confidential, comma, except as otherwise provided for under existing laws, comma, rules and regulations, Mr. President. That's my amendment, Mr. President, and the rationale for this is that in a lawyer-client relationship, it is regarded as the highest, the relationship is the highest fiduciary character, and the confidentiality of privileged communication should likewise be always maintained, Mr. President.
What does the
1 minute
sponsor-
suspension, Mr. President.
session suspension?
Page 4,
Session suspension.
line 14.
Shum.
Mr. President, after conferring with the sponsor, it appears, Mr. President, that the section I was referring to a while ago has now
Yeah.
been changed, and has moved to from E to G. So I'm now referring to letter G, line 6, page 5, Mr. President. So my amendments would still be the same. It will be an insertion after the word proceedings, provided that, comma, any communication, comma, correspondence, and or documents submitted or exchanged between the taxpayer and the qualified professional that they engage shall be considered strictly confidential, comma, except as otherwise provided under existing laws, comma, rules and regulations, Mr. President.
Accept, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Duly accepted. Amendments approved.
Mr. President, this is subject to relettering because we inserted some new provisions before that provision, Mr. President.
So renumbered accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, to continue with the amendments on the new section 5, paragraph H, on right to timely and expeditious completion of tax audits. On page 4, line 20, after the word completion, insert words and finality. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendments approved.
On page 4, line 22, after the words pending before, delete the word BIR and replace it with the words revenue authorities. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
Sorry, Mr. President, just to be more accurate, on page 4, line 22, after the words pending before the, delete the word BIR and replace it with the words revenue authorities.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
On page 4, line 24, insert a new sentence which shall read as follows. The taxpayer shall have the right to know when the revenue authorities have completed an audit or examination of the taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendment is approved.
Mr. President, that's another amendment of our good minority leader. On new section 5, paragraph J, on right against baseless assessment, on page 4, line 25, delete the phrase except in cases allowed by law and change to uppercase the first letter of the article the. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 4, line 27, after the words authorize revenue, delete the word examiners and replace it with the word authorities. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendments approved.
On page 5, new section 5, paragraph N, lines 19 to 20, delete the sentence, the taxpayer shall have the right to be treated professionally, courteously, fairly, and reasonably by revenue authorities, and insert a new paragraph which read as follows. The taxpayer shall have the right to receive prompt, courteous, and professional assistance in their dealings with the revenue authorities, to be spoken to in a way the taxpayer can easily understand, to receive clear and easily understandable communications from the revenue authorities, and to be provided with a mechanism to address inadequate service. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
That is likewise the amendment of our good minority leader. On page 5, section 5, paragraph O, lines 22 to 26, delete the sentences, the taxpayer shall have the right to privacy of communication and correspondence as guaranteed by the Constitution and the Data Privacy Act of 2012. The taxpayer shall have the right to demand that any information provided to revenue authorities shall not be disclosed and shall be kept confidential unless disclosed is expressly authorized by law or by the taxpayer, and insert a new paragraph which shall read as follows. The taxpayer shall have the right to expect that any inquiry, examination, or enforcement action by the government authorities shall comply with the law and be no more intrusive than necessary and will respect all due process rights. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 5, line 27, insert a new section 5, paragraph P, which shall read as follows. Right to confidentiality. Letter P, right to confidentiality. The taxpayer shall have the right to privacy of communication and correspondence as guaranteed by the Constitution and the Data Privacy Act of 2012. The taxpayer shall have the right that any information provided to revenue authorities shall not be disclosed and shall be kept confidential unless disclosure expressly authorized by law or by the taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
With the acceptance of the new paragraph C, E, and P, it is proposed to re-letter the paragraphs under section 5 accordingly. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection to the motion, amendments approved.
On section 6, paragraph B, on obligation on truthful and timely disclosure of information. On page 6, line 1, replace the word on with the word to. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 6, line 1, replace the word truthful with the word truthfully. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, the amendments approved.
On page 6, line 1, delete the words disclosure of and replace it with the word disclose. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 6, line 2, between the words and information, replace the word correct with the word accurate. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On section 7, on creation of the Office of the National Taxpayer Advocate. On page 6, line 32, delete the words justice, DOJ, and replace it with finance, DOF. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 7, line 2, after the word offices, insert a comma, and after which, insert the words create divisions and units, including regional or provisional offices as may be necessary, and insert a comma at the end of the new phrase. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 7, line 2, delete the phrase shall have the power and authority to between the words and designate. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 3, delete the phrase and create divisions and units including regional or provincial offices as may be necessary after the word office. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
And Mr. President, allow me to insert into the records the rationale. The attachment of the Office of the National Taxpayer Advocate, ONTA, to the DOF is aligned with the U.S. framework where the Taxpayer Advocate Service is constituted as an independent organization within the Internal Revenue Service. The ONTA's attachment to the DOF shall only be limited for purposes of administrative supervision to ensure the independence of ONTA and preclude any conflict of interest or undue influence in the day-to-day operations of the two agencies. So moving on, Mr. President, this is an amendment from our good minority leader on section 8 on powers, functions, and responsibilities of the Office of the National Taxpayer Advocate, paragraph B. On page 7, line 15, between the words represent and taxpayers, insert the words low income. Yes, so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection to the motion, amendments approved.
And Mr. President, I thank the minority leader for that amendment. And to enrich the records, Mr. President, let me provide the rationale for that critical amendment. We deemed it necessary that the term low-income taxpayers, with regard to the proposed mandate of the Office of the National Taxpayer Advocate, ONTA, to limit its representation to low-income taxpayers, be defined in the implementing rules and regulation. This is to give the flexibility to the implementing agencies, particularly the DOF and the BAR, to define low-income taxpayers based on existing definitions or income threshold as provided by various laws, rules, and regulations. This income threshold and brackets that define low-income or marginalized taxpayers may change over time, thus revising whenever necessary, the definition as provided in the IRR is much easier to undertake rather
Mr. President,
than
with the
amending.
indulgence of our esteemed colleagues,
Yes.
I was looking at the page that he is talking about. He made mention of page 8, Mr. President, while I'm looking at the latest copy, it's actually in page 7, where you said, Mr. President, delete the phrase and create divisions and units. It's on page 7 actually, in the new
Oh, sorry, Mr. President, I meant page 7.
That's page 7.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
President. So it's page
The
7.
Secretariat, please take note.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, dear
Yeah,
colleague.
page 7, Mr. President. So just to conclude, Mr. President, my rationale, thus revising whenever necessary, the definition as provided in the IRR is much easier to undertake rather than amending the law where it is defined, Mr. President. So let me just include that into the records. To continue, Mr. President, on page 7, line 16 to 17, insert the phrase "onta shall have the power to set" between the article "the" in lines 16 and the word "qualification" in line 17. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 7, line 18, delete the words "shall be" in relation and insert the word "pursuant." I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 7, line 18, after the phrase section 5, replace the letter E inside parentheses with the letter G. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 7, line 18, after the word act, insert a new sentence which reads, "The ONTA may collaborate with qualified professionals to assist in the representation of low-income taxpayers who have a dispute with revenue authorities and to provide education and outreach program to low-income taxpayers." I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection to amendment, amendments approved.
On section 9, on section 9, on the chief taxpayer advocate and deputy taxpayer advocates. On page 8, lines 7 to 8, replace the entire section 9. Replace the entire title of section 9. The taxpayer advocate, the chief taxpayer advocate, and deputy taxpayer advocates with a new title which reads as follows. Section 9. Qualifications of the National Taxpayer Advocate and Deputy National Taxpayer Advocate. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 8, replace the word chief with the word national. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8, lines 10, replace the word chief with the word national. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 11, insert the word national between the words deputy and taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, the amendments approved.
On page 8, line 13, replace the word chief with the word national. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection, the amendments approved.
On page 8, line 13, insert the word national between the words deputy and taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the motion, the amendments approved.
On page 8, line 14, delete the phrase "at least 40 years of age" and the comma preceding it. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
Use this na. Ito na gamitin ko. Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. On section 10, on appointment term rank. On page 8, line 19, replace the word chief with the word national. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to amendment, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 20, insert the words national within the words deputy and taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 18, line 20, after the word president, delete colon and the words provided that the appointment of and insert a period. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 21, before the word deputy, change to uppercase the first letter of the article "the," and after the said article, insert the phrase "National Taxpayer Advocate may recommend the." I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 21, between the words deputy and taxpayer, insert the word national. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 21, after the words deputy taxpayer advocate, insert the word who, delete the words upon the recommendation of the chief taxpayer advocate, and replace the words be appointed by the president. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the motion is approved.
On page 8, line 22, after the word advocate, delete the period, insert a colon, and add a proviso to read, provided that preferably at least 2 of the deputy national taxpayer advocates are women. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
On page 8, line 22, before the word shall, delete the word they and replace it with the words the 4 national taxpayer advocate. The national taxpayer advocate and the 4 deputy national taxpayer advocates. Likewise, on page 8, line 22, after the word shall, delete the word both. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8,
Mr. President,
yes, Mr. President.
Yes,
on the state-
Minority Floor Leader.
yes, on the same sentence, just to finish the thought. I move that we amend the term of office in the measure from 7 years to 3 years, Mr. President.
With a chance to be
Yes,
reappointed. one
yes,
term.
with the one reappointment is retained, Mr. President. It's
I
just-
accept, Mr.
just a
President.
term. So we will now change page, saan ba ito? Page, in the version we're working on, page 8, line 23,
Sinahabaan na pa sa seven.
change the word and figure 7 to 3, Mr. President, both in words and in figure. Thank you. Thank
I
you, Mr.
accept, Mr. President.
There being no objection to amendment of the Minority Floor Leader and accepted by the sponsor, amendments accepted.
On page 8, line 22, after the words serve for A, delete the word fixed. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to amendment, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 23, after the words reappointment and before period, add a comma, and after which insert the following. Subject to the provision of the Civil Service Commission rules on retirement age. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to the amendment, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 24, insert a new paragraph that reads, in case of vacancy arising from retirement, resignation, removal, permanent incapacity, or death of National Taxpayer Advocate or Deputy National Taxpayer Advocate, the President shall appoint a successor to serve the unexpired term of the predecessor. The new appointee, if serving the first term of the predecessor, can be reappointed subject to the rules set forth in this section. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection to amendment, amendments approved.
On page 18, this is an amendment.
Sir, page 8 lang po, nakama.
Ito?
Yes, sir, pati susunod.
This is an amendment from our good minority leader. On page 8, line 24, replace the word chief with the word national. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 24, insert the word national between the words deputy and taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 26, on page 8, lines 25 to 26, delete the words the Prosecutor General and Senior Deputy State Prosecutor of the National Prosecution Service and replace them with the words an Undersecretary and Assistant Secretary. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On section 11 on disqualification. On page 8, line 30, replace the word chief with the word national. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 8, line 30, insert the word national between the words deputy and taxpayer. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 9, section 12, line 14, after the word submit, delete the words "a report" and replace them with the phrase "his or her commitment." So,
There being no
his
objection,
or her comment, Mr. President, sorry.
there being no objection, the motion and amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Another amendment from our good minority leader, Mr. President. On page 9, section 13, delete tarification and insert the word tariff.
There
So
being,
moved.
there being no objection, amendments approved.
On section 14, on accessibility of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and Obligations. On page 10, line 1, delete the words "in all formats" and insert the words "whether printed." So moved, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 10, line 3, replace the word "language" with "languages." So moved, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motions approved.
On page 10, sections 15, line 5, on the word curriculum, change the first letter C into uppercase. So moved, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the amendments approved.
On section 17, on implementing rules and regulation. On page 10, line 17, delete the phrase "the DOJ in consultation with the DOF" and replace them with the phrase "the DOF in consultation with the." So moved, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page, this is an amendment from our good minority leader. On page 10, line 18, between the words BOC and Civil Service Commission, insert the words Bureau of Local Government Finance. So moved, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
On page 10, line 18, between the words CHED and ARTA, insert the word "and." So moved, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
And lastly, Mr. President, on page 10, line 18 to 19, delete the phrase "and the private sector." So moved, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motions approved.
That's it,
Amendments
Mr. President. Thank you. I thank the
Thank
good
you very
minority
much.
leader for his amendments, and I thank the body for their gracious time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. President, while a lot of our colleagues will be waiting, Mr. President, for a clean copy, Mr. President, and as per the meeting that, between the minority and the authors of the measure, we will suspend, Mr. President, the consideration of Senate Bill number 1806. So move, Mr. President.
Before I suspend the consideration of the measure, we ask the secretary to come up with a clean copy for us to take up tomorrow afternoon. So there being no objection to the motion of the majority floor leader, Senate Bill number 1806 is hereby suspended consideration.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just to put on record, my only objection, Mr. President, is that this representation, together with Senator Sani Angara, objects dun po, Mr. President, sa STSRO na si Attorney Dasil, who is no longer playing for the Senate Sentinels, Mr. President. Just to put that on record. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move, Mr. President, that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, May 9, 2023. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection to the motion of the majority floor leader, and I thank our colleagues for a very productive afternoon during our caucus and today's measures that we have taken up. With that, I thank everyone, and we adjourn session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, May 9, 2023. Have a safe evening, everyone.